We have a group of 5 for our Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition campaign. We go to one of the players' houses for every single session. This time, though, we had to switch it up last minute due to our DM having to help watch nephews while playing. So we grab everyone and head over to the DM's house instead. We get there and go in, and his mom instantly sighs and said, "We won't get anywhere in life playing games." We sit down at the table, and she proceeds to ask us if we have jobs, what we plan to do after high school. Even after some of us inform her that we have jobs and do plan to go to college, she still insists that we aren't going to get anywhere in life, and we don't know the difference between reality and fantasy. Also, multiple times within 10 minutes, she says, "I don't want any occult in my house. I watched a forensics episode about a boy killing his family, and he played Dungeons & Dragons, and the devil is a dragon." At one point, she insulted one of our players' parents because he said that his parents played as a kid, and they are successful. She opened her Bible, and she was going to start reading Bible verses to us until the DM's sister stopped his mother. He also had to ask his nephews to leave the kitchen because a nephew stole a dice and then brought it back. They then both started screaming at all of us, and one of our players walked out, and I quickly followed. TLDR, DM's mom went super Christian on us and tried to read Bible verses to us and berated us for being a cult. And that's why it's important to take the temperature of a residence before playing your nerd game in their living room, because yeah, the residents might be crazy. Also, side note, this isn't as big of a deal, but how the hell did they think they would be able to babysit while also playing D&D? D&D requires a lot of attention, but do you know what else requires your full attention? Kids who are both young and dumb. Seriously, those guys can be unnaturally self-destructive. I have scrolled through the horror stories of this subreddit for a bit, and finally decided to share my single worst D&D experience in my role-playing career. It is longer than I originally thought the tale would be, so I do hope you guys enjoy. This happened several years ago. A local game/comic book/nerd adjacent store had it so that every Wednesday was D&D night. They had a pretty big place where they would set up tables. The store would ask for volunteer DMs to run games. We got $15 in store credit per week for the service, so it wasn't nothing. This was pretty popular with 5 to 8 fully populated 6 to 8 player tables every week. The only rule is that you had to run modules, and you had to allow new people join your game if you had fewer than 8 players. This isn't vital to the story ahead, but it's just to set the scene. And if you're curious, yes, this is actually a really terrible setting to run a game. It's extremely crowded, and it's extremely loud, not particularly comfortable, and you only have about 2.5 hours for your game. I had come to this event at one point to play and ended up sticking with the table and getting into a relationship with a woman at the table. We'll call her Sarah. We were playing Tomb of Annihilation, and I joined this game actually as a player. While there were a few questionable events that happened during this time, it's not the focus of today's tale. I played for about 4 to 6 sessions before our DM, with no warning and very little explanation, just decided they didn't want to run the game anymore. They wanted to be a player. There is no apparent replacement, so I decided to step up and take over, making it my first ever time DMing using 5th edition in a serious game. Side note, the former DM went on to play a talking horse as his character in-game. With the preamble out of the way, we get to the meat. Many months later, when we are deep into the campaign, Sarah informs me that her mother and her mother's boyfriend want to come by for a session and play. And Sarah said yes, before asking me. Her mother and I had not gotten off on the best foot so far, and I didn't feel like I could face the social repercussions of putting my foot down and saying no, so I decided to just deal with it and accept their presence. The day of her inclusion comes in, and it could almost not be on a worse time for the mother to try and step in. The party is deep in the jungle around a large ruined city, and they're taking part in a big combat session. There is about 30 NPCs, 3 different factions, a ritual going on during all of it, and about 7 different initiative groups before we get to the 8 players. It's an overwhelming amount of things for me as DM to keep track of and present in a timely and continually interesting manner. In general, so many people would come and go from these games, make it to some sessions, but not to others. The table agreed to no longer even attempt to narratively justify player entrances and exits, so people more or less would just be there, or not be there sometimes. If memory serves, the mother made some strange frying pan cook that would heal people when she hit them with it. It's truly fuzzy, but I remember even less because the entire fight, I'm pretty sure the mother and her boyfriend hid behind a rock the entire time and did nothing. The moment of actual suffering. During the fight, Sarah, who is a druid, cast the spell Spike Growth. And for those who are not aware, the spell basically grows sharp thorns and spikes in a limited area that do damage when things attempt to walk through them. On a later turn, Sarah attempts to reposition the spell, move the spikes to a different area. Not cast the spell again, but just wants to move the spikes. The spell does not give you the ability to change the area once cast. There is no mechanic or ability that would allow her to do this, so I do not let her. Sarah does not take this all that well and argues with me she should be able to, while I attempt to explain why that can't work. It was frustrating, but nothing noteworthy. That is until her mother, that had said a grand total of maybe 50 words during the session, comes in with a vengeance and starts screaming at me. And I do mean top of her voice screaming at me about how I need to listen to her daughter and should let it happen, and I don't know what I'm doing. A sentence burned into my brain from the encounter is, "You have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so start using them." Again, to reiterate, that this isn't happening in the privacy of someone's house. This is going on in the middle of a game store with 40 other people around, all trying to play Dungeons and Dragons with several effective strangers at our table. I am thankful to say I remained calm and not only responded to her shouts in anger by trying to lower the intensity of the situation, but this did go on for the better part of 5 whole minutes. Eventually, she stopped yelling, and with some difficulty, we were able to move on, but needless to say, the atmosphere was tense, and the mood was killed. I have never been part of another D&D experience which caused me so much stress and anxiety in my life other than that. The whole game was a crapshoot, but that is a story for another time. To this day, myself and the mother do not get along with each other. Shocking, I know. I mean, I am happy to see that the relationship at the very least survived the encounter. I'm also surprised. That kind of awkwardness is not something that I think I would ever recover from. Getting screamed at is never fun, and this brings me to an important topic that XP to level 3 covered beautifully. Getting upset is not fun. Look, sometimes things go wrong at D&D, and I get it. It's okay to have emotions, to be frustrated even. However, getting super upset about it, well, that's just going to bring down the game for everybody else. Something like a dice roll or a ruling not going your way, that's going to be part of the game at some point. If you play this game long enough, eventually that kind of thing is going to happen. And getting mad and freaking out about it and screaming at the Dungeon Master, well, that's not going to make anything better. This also showcases the importance of having the right group at your table. Clearly, the Mother and OP do not get along, and mixing them in the same D&D group, well, that's a recipe for disaster, although I'm not going to pass blame on anyone for that one because she just seems, well, she seems like a unique individual, to say the least. They told me to watch some RPG horror stories so I can stop being such a bad Dungeon Master, but I'll go even one step further. I'm a fairly new DM running my first ever full campaign in a Pokemon RPG. Players include Tinkerer, a cocky Joker fellow who plays the introverted tech nerd. Baseball, passive player spends most of the time threatening with a baseball bat. Spooky, an experienced DM playing a kind of kooky ghost girl. Also, our problem player. So the campaign follows the classic story of a couple trainers going on the league, meeting friends, fighting bad guys, the whole shebang. At first, it started off pretty good. Tinkerer made contraceptions, I am so sorry, and powered up their Pokemon. Baseball gave thugs the stink eye, so strong they peed their pants, and Ghost Girl enjoyed the role-playing of being a sweet but socially crazy girl. So far, so enjoyable. The first instance of everything being not so great would be when the team arrived at a mysterious excavation site, and Spooky wanted to commune with the dead. I asked them to roll for it, and the result wasn't so hot. Spooky then proceeded to in-character roll on the ground, bash her head, and then try again? I would say that mysterious presence was causing her to move in an almost possessive state away from the ruins. She would then try to speak with the dead again. This continued 4 or 5 times before I capitulated and said she saw a ghost who was sad. This was enough for the party to move on. The adventure continues, sessions go on, and I noticed that Spooky loved using sleep. If she didn't like someone, she would sleep them. Start of combat, sleep. Wanted to show she was intimidating, sleep. Seeing as how useful it was, I considered changing the ability to how it worked and who it can affect. I will admit, this was a mistake on my end. Spooky says that I'm only doing this because I want my NPCs to have an epic monologue, and that I didn't know how to build encounters around it. which was, yeah, that was true, but still hurt. We eventually settled on some bosses that would be immune to sleep, but everyone else was fair game. At some points, complaining started to occur mid-session. When fighting a group of enemies, Spooky would explain the DM's actions in place of the NPCs. If a wild gang of Pokemon showed up, she would state how this is an unavoidable fight that the DM just wants us to do. If an ally NPC was fighting suboptimally, they would say, of course our ally isn't getting information, the DM is trying to make the combat harder for us. If I threw a puzzle or an open-ended quest, you bet your bottom dollar. If Spooky's first idea didn't work, she would say, I don't know what you want us to do, DM. I would sometimes let them do cool stuff that their class didn't permit, but heaven forbid, if I ever said no to a ruling going their way, I would get a full minute of, that's awful, that's BS, great, now my character, this ability, it's useless. I actually stated multiple times before that the campaign that we're playing is not a campaign where dying is a thing, and they have a little bit of plot armor. This does not stop Spooky from getting panicky when she's at half health or gets CC'd for like a turn. She gets audibly frustrated and starts dictating everyone else's moves, or else the DM is going to kill me. It started slowly feeling like if I did not agree or accept everything they tried, it was because I have a player versus DM mentality. All of these complaints were starting to wear me down, but I kept going because I did enjoy playing with the group, Spooky included. But I was reaching a point where every time she complained mid-session, I had to leave Discord for 5 minutes just so I can cool off. The last session, the team wandered into a cave and came across a wild Pokemon that was building a house with kids. Spooky approached them and asked if they could join her on an adventure. So far, this usually worked. In fact, Spooky caught 2 Pokemon just beforehand by giving them snacks. But this Pokemon was reluctant. It didn't want to do any adventuring and wanted to be left alone with her kids. When Spooky asked if she could take one of the Pokemon's children, the Pokemon got reasonably defensive. At this point, Spooky was irritated and wanted to use sleep on the Pokemon so she could catch them without a fight. Tinkerer, out of character, chimed in with wanting to use his sleep attack so it was stronger and had a small chance of missing and increase the catch rate. So while Tinkerer was doing this in character, he was still role-playing the reluctant nerd that was saying things like, should we really be doing this? I never caught a Pokemon that actively said no, to which Spooky, out of character, replied, dude, this is a monster catching game. We're supposed to catch monsters. Why are you being moral about this? Seeing as I felt like a player was talking to a character, I pitched in and asked if this was something Spooky's character would do. This frustrated Spooky. She demanded that I retcon the entire interaction and that she should roll to find the same type of Pokemon without the moral dilemma behind it, all the while proclaiming I made these Pokemon with express purpose of denying her. The session shortly ended. I and the rest of the group were getting tired of Spooky complaining so much. With the help of Baseball's husband, also DM, we composed a letter to explain how I felt and what we wanted changed. In summary, it stated, please respect my rulings when it comes to the dice and roleplay. If you have a problem with how I'm running things, write it down so we can talk about it after the session. Please don't take any of my rulings or enemy behaviors as a personal attack. If I screw up, it's out of incompetency rather than malice. Spooky was not pleased. They said they weren't going to address anything in the letter and that I needed to hop into the voice channel because I'm hiding my hateful intent behind words I looked up in the dictionary. Pro tip, if someone is angrily demanding you hop into a voice chat, don't. This then turned into a whole day of arguing where Spooky claimed that I'm doing something wrong or evil. I either agree or clarify my statements. Spooky then proceeds to insult me. Repeat for 8 hours. Example 1. You want to control me. You think I need to dance in your perfect world with all your perfect NPCs. Well, I'm a human being. I demand to be seen as the equal I am rather than as a puppet you throw away when you're bored. My world is flawed, my NPCs are flawed, free will is the greatest thing players have. Oh my god, you're so pretentious! Example 2. Your writing is so infuriating. You are refusing to improve because you can't take criticism. I ask for feedback, but you don't listen to it. You actively ignore it. I mean, I want to improve, but change doesn't happen overnight. Oh, how rich, how very poetic. Maybe you could just get your head out of your ass. It was obvious to me I wasn't continuing the game like this. The conversation died down with her talking about how I'm just like her in high school and how she wants to see me grow into a great person and that I shouldn't give up on the game just because of a little criticism. It's all out of love. I was firm with saying, I'm done with the game. With that, the last thing Spooky said to me was, I can't believe you gave up so easily. I thought you weren't that kind of guy. At first, I tried to ignore this comment, but this is what tipped me over the edge. At first, I thought of explaining how absolutely awful of a thing it is to say that to someone, but I just decided to block them. I am taking a break from DMing for the rest of the year. What's the moral of the story? Players, sometimes the DM just doesn't know what they're doing. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. That is really important to know. You're not damned to be a bad person just because you did a bad thing. Hell, it's not always just a bad thing. Sometimes it's just a simple mistake. D&D and all TTRPGs are fairly complicated, even at the best of times, and that means that sometimes people are going to make mistakes. It's important to keep this in mind, and it's important to be patient when your DM is trying to improve. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that you can't criticize your dungeon master or your game master. Of course you can, but this isn't the way to do it. On top of that, the absolute hatred of moral dilemmas is interesting. I understand that that sort of situation doesn't fit in every single game, but clearly the other players were at least kind of feeling it, so it's truly sad to see a player just completely brush it off and try to get it retconned, because that kind of moment can be a great opportunity for roleplay for the entire party. It does suck to see this game had to end because of Spooky's nonsense and malarkey, but at the end of the day, you need to do what's best for you and your mental well-being. And if ending the game was the OP's best shot at improving their mental health, well then, you have to do what you have to do. This story is about a game that never got past Session 0 due to the awkwardness created by a specific player in response to trying to force the others to implement character backstories for everyone that only suited him. To set the scene, I've been the DM for most of my group's game for over a decade. I was running a small adventure using 5th edition, which had just come out at the time, for several newbies who had expressed interest in role-playing games but wanted to learn the ropes. Joining us was a veteran of my games from the group I usually run with. In retrospect, I should have seen the red flags before even starting the session, as this veteran player had some issues with other members of my regular group in the past due to having my guy and main character syndromes. However, he insisted on joining to help the others learn, as one of them was his girlfriend that he had just met, and he wished to be there to personally help her to get the grasp of the rules. There were 5 players in total, though the story mainly concerns the aforementioned couple, who we will refer to by their classes, Ranger and Paladin. The party itself consists of a rogue, a paladin, veteran player, a ranger, his girlfriend, a sorcerer, his girlfriend's sister, a cleric, and of course myself, as the game master. We began Session 0 by explaining the basics of how to roll up a character by choosing race, class, backgrounds, and the usual stuff. A few of the players wanted help writing up their backstories, as they only had a general concept of what they wanted their characters to be like, but needed assistance in fleshing out the details to help them with the setting. We were playing in the Forgotten Realms. Ranger begins by stating that she wants to be a hardcore survivalist who grew up alone in the woods, using the trope of literally being raised by wolves. She had no notion of civilized mannerisms and no idea who her parents were. This will become important later shortly. Together, we worked out that likely her human parent abandoned her. She was a half-elf on the edge of the high forest of Faerun to be raised by the elven people due to financial problems and to the stigma of raising a half-blood child. Her elven parent left immediately after her birth. Rather than being adopted by the elves, they shunned her as well, and it was finally a lone druid who found her and took her in, teaching her the ways of natural balance and the cycle of life. Paladin also decided to write up his character's past as being from the High Forest, so there was an easy way to link his character to that of his girlfriend. He was a courtier from the fallen realm of Irlan, which was once the kingdom of elves of the High Forest before it fell to ruin. This would make him well over 500 years old. Another red flag, but I did warn him that his character would not suddenly be a master of history and knowledge simply because of his age. He wanders the forest looking for relics of the ancient past to preserve and seeks a renewal of the elven lands as a way to uphold his oath to the ancients. This is where the problem begins. Paladin suddenly decides that it would be cool if, as a way to further link his character's fate to that of his girlfriend's, Ranger would agree to have her parents be known to him as friends or descendants on her elven side, related to this fallen realm that he used to protect. She reluctantly agrees, but makes it clear that she still does not know her parents, and therefore does not know him yet. The link between them would be tenuous at best. She is also not interested in the politics of elven realms, fallen or otherwise. She just wants to hunt and scout. This apparently did not work for him, as he continued to write in his backstory that not only does he know her parents, now suddenly her elven parent is actually descended from the line of royalty that he was sworn to protect, so it is now his duty to defend her. She is, after all, the heir to this royal lineage with this sudden rewrite. Ranger was having none of it, saying that it made no sense. Why would Paladin have allowed her to be abandoned in the woods this whole time? Why not raise her himself instead of risking her to the wilds? His response caused me to do a double take and elicited a few groans from around the table. He would not have had the heart to raise her as a daughter, for from the moment he laid eyes upon her, when she was born, he apparently watched the birth, he knew that she was destined to be his true love. He would watch over her from that point on, always at a distance, making sure no harm would befall her in the forest. Excuse me, what the fuck? There are so many things to dissect from that line, but I think it's self-explanatory why nobody should be writing stories about how a 500-year-old man suddenly fell in love with infants and stalked them until maturity. Ranger immediately ripped her character sheet out of his hands and began yelling at him, saying that there was no way she was going to use that disgusting idea that he was forcing his character onto hers through the use of their backstory. She wanted help writing one, but he had no business narrating to her the plot of her entire life to this point without her having any say in it. I tried to interject, saying he might indeed be getting a bit heavy-handed with forcing details into her character's history, but he just ignored this response and just kept arguing that it was in everyone's best interest to let him weave a connection between the characters. It was at this point, Sorcerer finally spoke up, stating that what Paladin was doing was bringing main character syndrome to the game by forcing his and her characters to be arbitrarily important to the setting. Rogue agreed, stating that so far Paladin had been showering Ranger with unwanted favoritism and that everyone else was feeling left out while I, the game master, was unsuccessfully trying to diffuse the tension and salvage the situation. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like main character syndrome isn't a problem in this story. It is. But how the hell is that the primary focus? Did you read that backstory? I mean, seriously, did you read? Okay, Paladin responded by saying that he was clearly more knowledgeable than them for having played for so much longer, and even went so far as to call both Rogue and Sorcerer idiots. He said that if they did not want his help, they should leave. They did. So did Ranger, who immediately broke up with him on the spot. As he stormed out, I was stuck in the awkward situation of trying to console Ranger while also telling everyone that the session was over and that I was going home. I later contacted everyone, except Paladin, over Messenger, asking if they were willing to try a new Session 0. They replied by saying that this experience left a sour taste in their mouth and that might be a long time before they attempted another RPG again. And that is how a disastrous Session 0 ended the adventure before it even began. TLDR. One player forces an awkward romance plot into his girlfriend's character backstory by inserting his own character into it and claiming that she is secretly royalty who he immediately fell in love with when she was born. He was a 500-year-old elf. She breaks up with him in real life, and everyone awkwardly leaves Session 0, vowing to not touch an RPG for a while. It sucks to see campaigns get cancelled, especially because of incel white knights like Paladin over here, but honestly I would have been more weirded out if everyone in the group just got up from this extremely awkward and possibly traumatizing situation to just play D&D again because, oh my god, that is so awful. I mean, we've had worse, but this one is just so painfully awkward that the secondhand embarrassment is off the charts. It's even worse when you remember that Paladin and Ranger had just gotten together. They had just met. They probably had just gone on their first date a couple weeks ago, and he's pulling this crap during their first D&D game together. I mean, my god. Yeah, guys, don't do that. I haven't been in a committed relationship, but even I know. Don't do this. It's gonna end badly for you. It ended badly for him. I really hope that he can learn from this and realize that his actions were really bad, but I have a feeling that that's not going to happen. Wonder why. Danger. The first server I joined, I ended up really liking. They were kind, welcoming, and quickly taught me the basics. When I started my games, there was plenty of interest, but I was new to being a game master. I sucked. After 6 months of trying, I eventually came down to 3 people that stuck around. They were rather supportive. One, a mod, was a quiet person with a mild speech impediment. She always showed up to my games. Through the months, I learned quite a bit about her life while I was always redirective and non-specific, friendly but not quite friends. When the server owners opened applications for a mod position, she suggested that I try out for it. The couple that owned it were nice enough, but internally they were very combative. I still went through the application and got the spot. Still running my game, the other mod was always in attendance, though she would often be muted and non-responsive to my game. I berated myself for just being a crappy game master. One day, while testing some ideas with a different player, I was flexing some of the voices I could do that had not yet entered the game. She was also in attendance as usual, but not muted. I don't know when it started. I had thought I had heard something in the voice chat. I paused my conversation with the other player, checking the audio levels and my immediate surroundings, not hearing anything but only getting confusion from these two, so I just continued. And then again, I heard a semi-rhythmic wetness? No, I thought. That couldn't be. After a long pause, I asked him again. The other player said he had no idea. She said nothing. I continued to talk and looked again. The rhythm followed the peaks in her mic. Then she, started to vocalize a bit. The post said, the mod used my voice. I thought that she just recorded him without his permission. I didn't know that she was using the voice for a purpose beyond the... Why do I even bother? My head went through a lot of things. Shame, excitement, guilt, disgust, and violation. I continued the story for a few more sentences as the sounds climaxed. I excused myself for some non-related reason that I don't remember. I stopped interacting with anyone on there. Do I confront her, bring it up with the owners? She had been a longtime friend with them, and I was just the new guy. The thought of even going through that kind of confrontation was way too much for me. After 2 weeks of silence, I just left the server. Oh, she messaged me. She called me. I blocked her. Jesus Grimbles. Consent, people. Use it. TLDR. Mod masturbates at me during game workshop. Probably did it before too, but was muted. I leave the server. I don't play on other servers anymore. You know, honestly, after an experience like that, I wouldn't blame you for just quitting D&D. I mean, I don't want you to quit D&D. I don't. I'm happy that you're still into the game, but holy ass. Don't do that. What she did, you can't do that, alright? It is so awful for the person that you're doing it to. It just feels so wrong without consent. Consent is so important, and unfortunately, a lot of these horror stories are about consent being ignored. Don't do that. As for the OP solution, honestly, guys, not everything needs to be a big confrontation. If you're not comfortable, if you feel wrong about the situation and you just want to separate, you want to set up boundaries, you want to go, that is okay, especially in an online game where you're not really friends with all these people. Like the OP said, they're the new guy. They're just new to the server. They're not close friends with anyone. They don't owe anyone any kind of explanation. If you feel deeply uncomfortable, which after that experience is totally reasonable, you are within your rights to just leave. Somehow not the worst one we've read, but maybe the most uncomfortable, to say the least. Alright, and that is going to be the end of today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. That was quite a doozy, but I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did enjoy, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Tabletop Tavern Tips, where I give advice to both DMs and players old and new. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment white knight to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.